Gin companies love to slap buzzwords on their label to make them stand out. Small batch, handcrafted, premium. But the real question is, do these words actually mean something? Are they backed by some kind of regulations, or they're just smoke and mirrors designed to fool you? The reality is not as simple as black and white, actually. It's a little bit more complicated than that. So today we're gonna take a short break from cocktails to uncover the reality behind these labels, so that way next time you buy a bottle of gin, you'll know exactly what you're paying for. So my friends, without further ado, if you are ready, let's get to the bottom of this. Let's go. Alright, so before we dive right in, I would like to address a short disclaimer. Most of what we're going to talk about today is based on interpretations of laws, and across different countries, laws were quite contradictory sometimes. So it was a bit hard to demystify everything clearly, but of course I did my researches, I questioned some professionals of the industry, and I also fact-checked everything that I could. But I'm not a lawyer, so if you notice that I misinterpret something, feel free to let me know in the comments below. It's going to be helpful for everyone. Also, I think it's really important to say that I'm not doing this to put down any product on the market. It's just that I know it can be pretty confusing, so hopefully that's just gonna be a guide to help you to make the right choice next time you buy a bottle of gin. So with that out of the way now, let's dive in the thick of it. The small batch, rare, crafted, handcrafted, premium, ultra premium. All these beautiful adjectives are really cool, but they're nothing but marketing tools, and they're not backed by any regulations. That doesn't mean it's a lie though. I would say the vast majority of the companies are writing things on their labels because they truly believe in it. But what's true for someone may not be for someone else, and because there's no regulations whatsoever for this type of stuff, and I'm talking worldwide, it's really hard to quantify, for example, what would be a small batch gin or what would be a crafted gin rather than an industrial one. So like I said, it doesn't mean it's not true, but you have to do your due diligence. A great example of what can be true for someone and not for someone else is Hendrix. They put small batch on their label, but they sell almost 2 million cases a year, and for a lot of people, this is not a small batch gin anymore. But they still make their gin with 2 small alembics because they love them, they believe it produces a better gin, and even though the total output yearly is large, each batches are quite small, so it makes sense to them, it makes sense to me as well, but it may not make sense to you. So that's why I say you need to do your due diligence. And it's the same thing for all these beautiful adjectives like premium. What is premium? I mean, I know someone who produces gin and he is so careful about all the details. All his ingredients are locally sourced. Everything in his production line, from the unit he uses to fill the alembic to the seals of the alembic, everything is non-reactive. So obviously he has all the rights in the world to put premium on his bottle. But on the other hand, if I would be producing a gin simply by throwing some artificial flavoring in neutral spirit, it would still be legal to call this a premium gin. So at the end of the day, it doesn't mean it's a lie, it just means it doesn't mean much. Where it gets really interesting though, and what you can use to truly understand what you're buying, is when you start looking at the laws. But before we start talking about that, I need to take a short break and drink my pre-alcohol. You know, my life is not always easy. I make cocktail videos for a living, and sometimes I even get to drink them. But I also have to wake up the next morning and get back to work. These videos are not going to edit themselves, you know? And that's when pre-alcohol by beverages comes in. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut, and it's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for how you feel the next day. And pre-alcohol by beverages produces an enzyme that breaks this byproduct down. So if you make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night and drink it responsibly, you'll feel your best tomorrow. Like me. I've been using pre-alcohol for a couple of years now, and I keep on coming back to it. But you don't have to take my words for it, because they offer a 100% money-back guarantee. So if you want to give it a try, click the link in the description to get 15% off your first order at checkout. So thank you very much, Pre-Alcohol, for sponsoring this episode. But now let's go back to our program. Alright, so as I was saying just a moment ago, it gets really interesting when we start looking into the laws. As long as we truly understand what is gin legally, We can decipher what's written on labels to know exactly what we're buying. That being said, if you remember, I told you some laws can be contradictory depending on the country we're in. So because the strictest gin regulations are the European Union's, that's what we're going to use today to set foundation, and then we're going to talk about the differences between different countries. So in Europe, if you see a bottle that's labeled as London Gin or London Dry Gin, it means the exact same thing. For me, the most important thing to remember when it comes to this category is the fact that no additives, coloring agent, or flavoring, whether they are artificial or natural, can be added after distillation. And in terms of sugar, no more than 0.1 gram of sugar per liter can be added. There's also something about the quality of the alcohol that needs to be used, and most importantly about the percentage of alcohol by volume. It needs to be distilled at least at 70% alcohol by volume, and it can be reduced down all the way to 37.5% and only with water. Then we have the distilled gin, which is not often disclosed explicitly on the label. Most of the time you're only going to see gin in front of the bottle, and somewhere else on the back or on the side it's going to be written that the gin is distilled. That means that for this category, the only flavor that needs to be extracted by distillation is juniper berries. Then after the distillation, some other flavors can be added. Also some coloring or some sugar can be added. A good example for this category is Hendrick's, because they don't hide it from anyone. The cucumber flavor is added after distillation because they simply realized that it was better that way. So that's why it's only written gin in the front of the bottle, but in the back it's written the gin is distilled and the cucumber infused. Then we have the standalone gin category, which is the broad category including pretty much everything, but usually when you see gin on your label without any other mentions of distillation whatsoever, that will mean that your gin is probably a compound gin, which is a gin that's not flavored by distillation. As long as your dominant flavor is juniper berries, that the alcohol used is neutral grain spirit, and it's bottled at 37.5 minimum, it can be called a gin. Where this gets interesting for people outside European Union is when you buy a bottle of gin anywhere else on the planet from a brand that's distributed in Europe. That way, simply by looking at the label, you can know for a fact how the gin was made. Where this gets confusing though is when you buy a bottle that's not distributed within European Union, because laws in other countries are much looser. So sometimes distilleries will make their gin according to the European Union regulations, so they can call their gin like London Dry Gin, for example, without being called out. But some other companies will take advantage of the fact that these regulations do not exist in their country, so they can still call their gin a London Dry Gin without meeting European Union's regulations. And it becomes quite hard eventually to decipher all this. So here's what I believe are the most important things to think about when you buy gin in Canada and in the US. In Canada, London Dry Gin doesn't exist. The highest standard in Canadian regulations is for dry gin, which actually doesn't exist in European regulations, but it would be the equivalent to the distilled gin, so mainly juniper flavored, juniper distillation with other botanicals, no sugar added, and some other flavors can be added after distillation. It doesn't mean that if you see a Canadian gin with the London Dry Gin mention that they're lying to you. It just means that you're not protected by law, so either you're gonna have to trust them or to dig further to see if they're telling the truth. Then, like in Europe, a gin that's not flavored at all by the process of the distillation, meaning it's only a mix of neutral grain spirit with other flavoring agents, juniper berries being the dominant flavor, will not be allowed to be called a dry gin, but only a gin. Now in the US, it's even looser than that. A distilled gin dominantly flavored with juniper, but that can also be made by adding some other flavors after distillation, or sugar and coloring agents, would be considered a distilled gin in the US. And even trickier, it can also be called a London, dry, Old Tom, or a mix of these four terms together. So more than anywhere else on the planet, in the US, when you buy a bottle of gin, you need either to trust the distillery or do your due diligence to make sure you know what's in your bottle. So my friends, this is it for me today. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this video useful, and in case I missed anything or if you have any questions, please drop a comment below and I'll do my best to answer it. So once again, thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe before you go, to turn the bell if you want to make sure not to miss the next one, and we're gonna see each other again very soon. Bye.